Hello everyone and welcome to another edition of 30th Mirror and our series exploring star forts. This week's focus will be on the star fort of Krasny Yar and the Novo Zakamskya fortified line in the province of Samara, Russia. According to historians, the fort was built in 1732 as part of Russia's aggressive border expansion ever deeper into the south and west of Asia. The phenomenon of the fortified line began to appear in abundance in the early part of this millennia, as rulers looked for ways to secure the outer reaches of their empires. Running from the south part of Samara, 200 kilometers north to Kachui, the line is mainly a trenched earthwork with a 4-meter earthen ramp and redans, which are open-field triangular reinforcements protruding towards the enemy, with fortresses and redoubts every 10 to 12 kilometers. We see other examples of this defense tactic across Eastern Europe and Russia, such as the Zmyevy ramparts, a walled earthwork on the banks of the Dnieper River south of Kiev, presumed to have been built in the 2nd century AD. Our story begins in Samara, a medieval trade city on the banks of the Volga River on the southern border of Russia, just north of Kazakhstan. Samara gets its name from the ancient Neolithic Samaran culture, who occupied the region in the 5th millennium BC. In 1973, archaeological excavations uncovered artifacts such as pottery, as well as human and animal graves dating back to 5500 BC. The Kurgan hypothesis associates this culture with early versions of the Proto-Indo-European language. The city of Samara begins to appear on Italian maps in the 14th century. At that time, it was only a haven for pirates and raiders, who used the elevated shorelines as lookout points to spot oncoming trade ships. In 1586, a fortress was built where the Volga and Samara rivers met to protect this important trade route. As Samara's port grew, so did its importance, and in 1731, according to historians, it was decided that the Novo Zakamskya fortified line be established. The old Zakamskya line, built between 1652 and 1656, was a continuation of the Zimbursk intersection line, but had been repeatedly broken by the Nogai and Bashkir tribes. Thus, it was decreed by Peter I that a new line be built. Although he did not live to see its construction, the Novo Zakamskya line was built between 1732 and 1736, marking the eastern border of Kazan province. The images we see were taken in 2013 by Vladimir Sverkalov, a Russian photographer and blogger who posts under the moniker Uncle Vova's blog. He's got a page with a lot of really cool aerial photos taken by drone of the Novo Zakamskya line, as well as the fortress of Krasny Yar. You should definitely check him out. Accounts vary as to how many people were involved in this project, but several different sources claim that approximately 3,000 peasant workers out of a pool of 15,000 from the province of Kazan took part in the build over 4 years. By 1737, just a few years after it was completed, the Novo Zakamskya line was deemed unnecessary as plans for a new defensive line, the Orenburg line, began to take shape. By 1743, the Novo Zakamskya line was abandoned, and all settlements, workers, and the majority of soldiers were sent to settle the new defensive line. It is of interest to note not only the short lifespan of this defensive line, having been abandoned within the first few years of its completion, but also that it was even possible for a peasant workforce of 3,000 to have dug the trenches and earthworks that make up the Novo Zakamskya line, as well as the forts and redoubts along it. This is a topic we will continue to examine in future videos, but suffice it to say that the amount of work and the short period of time it was completed over leave even the most optimistic minds scratching their heads. We start our journey at the southern part of the Novo Zakamskya line in Alexeyevka. There is some debate as to the exact location of this fortress. Conflicting sources point to 2 different locations. The first, a squarish wooded area with almost no discernible features, and the second and more probable location, with mounded earthworks clearly visible closer to the base of the Zakamskya line. Moving northward, we pick up the first of the redans that mark the beginning of the Novo Zakamskya line. It is difficult to tell whether the gaps in the line were intentional or whether the modern cities simply built over them. As we continue along the line, the redans become more clear. Our first stop is what would appear to be a redoubt. However, there is no information regarding this structure or even a name. Our second stop on the line is known as the Red Redoubt, just east of the village of Vodino. All that remains of this outpost is the earthen mounds around its circumference. There is no information available on this fort other than its name. Continuing north and westward, we come to our next site, the fortress of Krasny Yar. The most well-known and well-maintained of these derelict forts, Krasny Yar loosely translates to Red Jar, supposedly named after the red clay found at the riverbanks of the Volga River. Measuring 300 meters by 180 meters, Krasny Yar is one of 5 known star forts along the Novo Zakamskya line. As we discussed, the Novo Zakamskya line and its system of forts had a very short lifespan and thus saw little to no action. Krasny Yar being the only one to have been part of any documented battle over 50 years after its construction during the Peasant Rebellion 1773 to 1775. The fort was in the hands of an Ottoman detachment of the rebel force, but were easily defeated and the fort was retaken. It's a shame to see the way these historical sites were neglected, but also desecrated, as the Soviet Union allowed a sports arena and motocross track to be built on the site. Moving on, the line takes a sharp turn, heading northeast. We eventually reach the site of the Rakhovsky Redoubt. Measuring approximately 40 meters by 40 meters, the Rakhovsky, much like the Red Redoubt, is a minor outpost and once again has no information available. We follow the line ever eastward to our next stop, Chernonoshensky Redoubt, which is in even worse shape than its predecessors. Barely distinguishable from the natural terrain, there is once again no information on this site. Our next stop is the Lower Narovsky Redoubt. Measuring 60 meters by 50 meters, there is once again no information available on this site. The line takes another turn here, heading eastward again, before turning north as we come to Sergievskaya Fortress. We can see how the incursion of industry has once again all but erased this site from view. Once again, there is very little information available about this site, other than it having been occupied by 3 horse companies of the Bielyarsky Regiment, about 300 men, and 1 foot company of the Alexievsky Regiment, about 150 men. Moving on, we come to our first completely unknown fort. As little information is available about the Zakamskaya line and the forts along it, they at least have names, whereas this fort, as well as several other stops on our tour, do not. And yet this is clearly an old military outpost. We see the same pointed bastion-style formations and triangular-shaped redans around the perimeter. Not much farther up the line we find another unknown fortress. This one in even better condition than the last, yet no information or even a name could be found. A little farther north and we come across yet another unknown and unnamed redoubt. Measuring 100 meters by 100 meters, this redoubt looks to have been well maintained, as the earthworks and walls are in relatively pristine condition. As we move on again, continuing northward, we come to our second star fort, the fortress of Kondurka. Measuring 230 by 160 meters, much like Krasny Yar, Kondurka has survived the centuries. Almost a replica of Krasny, all that remains of this outpost are the earthworks. We move northward again. At this point we lose sight of the line as it passes through a 30-kilometer stretch of forested area. Once again there is conflicting information as to whether the line continues through this wooded area or whether its builders considered the natural terrain to be impassable by invaders and simply bypassed this area. The line re-emerges at the north end of the forest, where we find yet another unknown and unnamed redoubt. As we move northeast, we eventually reach the next site in Chemershan. Here we find the third star fort in this line, the Chemershan Fortress. This star fort has survived the centuries, but due to neglect, the forest seems to have reclaimed the majority of its interior. Measuring 400 meters by 390 meters, Chemershan, much like its predecessors, has no available information. The line turns yet again, heading east before we come to our fourth star fort, Sheshmin Fortress. Clearly this star fort has not fared well over the years, as the earthworks have eroded to near indistinguishable. Sheshmin measures 175 meters by 175 meters, and once again, due to neglect, the forest has reclaimed most of its interior. According to historians, the line continues through another forested area and re-emerges 20 kilometers northeast outside the city of Kachui, where we find the fifth and final star fort on the Novo Zakamskya line, the Kachusky Redoubt. Once again, we see how time has ravaged this site. Although the earthworks remain clear and no forest has grown over it, we can see how it has begun to fade and will one day no longer be visible. Although scholars claim the Novo Zakamskya line continues north to Kazan, we were unable to spot any visual evidence of this through Google Earth or our research, other than 2 more barely visible redans just north of Kichui. So were these earthworks really built by peasant man in an attempt to defend his borders? If so, why is there so little information about the builders and their techniques? And with such an enormous project covering such a massive area, is it possible that not a single battle or invasion took place? And why would they have continued to build these lines, only to abandon them and move on? There are several counterculture theories that attempt to explain these odd formations, the most prominent being they were part of an ancient power generation and distribution grid built long before modern-day man settled these regions. An intriguing idea, particularly because the star fort's entrenched earthworks resemble the foundations of modern-day electric towers and power line trenches. Although there is little evidence to support this theory, we here at 30th believe there is just as little to support the mainstream explanation.